Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our first webinar of 2023. This will be the first of a four-part webinar series. Today we are joined by Daniel Thornton, Sharif Gardner, and Susie Jones. Firstly, Dan is the co-founder and CEO of GoldPhish. Dan is a former UK Royal Marine Commando. After his military career and a number of years in corporate security risk management, Dan co-founded GoldPhish, a fully remote, web-based cybersecurity awareness training company to help protect global SMEs and their people from cybercrime through fun cyber education. Sharif Gardner is the head of defense, military, and law enforcement for the UK, Ireland, and Nordics, known as the SANS Institute. Having extensive experience within the cybersecurity insurance and advisory space, Sharif is now responsible for SANS business with defense, military, and law enforcement agencies in the UK, Ireland, and Nordic regions to enhance the SANS mission of making the world a safer place. Most notably, Sharif designed and built the globally recognized Security and Risk Management Consultants course, SRMC, which is the UK's leading security management course. Our final host is Susie Jones. Susie is the CEO of Cynch Security, a Melbourne-based company on a mission to help small business leaders prevent cybersecurity incidents. Susie is an experienced leader and risk manager who also spent years specializing in insurance at Marsh and Willis Towers Watson before joining Australia Post and expanding to general cyber risk and commercial management. As Australia Post's head of cybersecurity business services, Susie sharpened her skills as an interface between technical information security office personnel and senior business stakeholders. Thank you to all our expert hosts who have incredible insight and advice to deliver on extremely important topics for the year ahead. So welcome to the cybersecurity landscape for 2023, and let's get started. First things first, let's go over some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and will be used by the GoldPhish team. We'll make the link to this webinar recording available. We are only assigned an hour, so we will be covering questions at the end of the webinar. Feel free to post questions in the message section for our hosts to answer at the end of the webinar. Today we are covering three key topic areas. Each of these topics will be covered by one of the panelists, with others giving their respective commentary. Our three key topics are mitigating human risk, the new cyber landscape, and security awareness in 2023. So moving on to topic number one, which is for you, Dan. What are the most common types of human risk in organizations, and how can they be identified and mitigated?
Morning, Ers. Thanks very much. So humans are essential to every business. They are our most valuable asset. However, in the world of information security, they can present a massive risk to all organizations out there. So human risk is something that we have to consider and we have to start addressing. I'd say some of the main types, the most common types of human risks that we need to consider. Number one being social engineering. We've all heard about phishing, but this and other types of social engineering techniques are currently one of the biggest risks to organizations of all sizes. They're increasingly resulting in unwitting or well-meaning employees giving away access of sensitive data to criminals. And the majority of the high-profile cyber attacks we're currently seeing in the media are a result of an employee falling for one of these scams. Some of the top mitigation for this risk that organizations can implement is cybersecurity awareness training for employees, using spam filters to block suspicious emails, and implementing multi-factor authentication for sensitive accounts. Next, one of the biggest human risks we've got is passwords. Unfortunately, it's still a necessity in the way that we work and the way that we operate our systems. Passwords are essential to everyday life in business. And so weak passwords are a common human risk that organizations have to overcome. Humans are inherently lazy. And often choose either easy to guess passwords or they reuse the same passwords across multiple accounts. And so to mitigate that risk, organizations they can conduct password strength audits across their systems, making sure that weak passwords aren't being used. They can implement password policies that require strong and unique passwords. And then additionally, organizations need to start thinking about using MFA a lot more, especially on their more important accounts and sensitive sort of administrator accounts. And then finally, I'd look at insider threats. Don't underestimate the damage that can be caused by an employee or contractor who's been pissed off by a company. Malicious insiders, occur when an employee or a contractor intentionally causes harm to an organization's systems, data, or network. That said, even well-meaning, happily employed employees can cause devastating damage by making unintentional mistakes or human error. And we see this a lot in some of the cyber attacks in the media. So to mitigate against the risk of the insider threat, organizations need to take access control a lot more seriously and start monitoring user activity to detect that sort of behavior. Organizations can conduct background checks on employees. And again, cybersecurity awareness training is really critical so that everyone in the organization can be aware of the risk of this and be able to spot malicious behavior as early as possible. So those are sort of three key human risks that organizations need to be considering as.
Great, thanks, Dan. So just building on that and the human element, so onto your second question, which is look at the recent events involving enterprise-level organizations, such as LastPass. How is the human element playing a role in these attacks?
A lot of the large breaches we've seen over the last 12 months in the mainstream media for the large brands, a huge percentage of those have been due to some form of human error. So LastPass was social engineering. We've just spoken about it. Phishing and social engineering is still a huge risk, despite the large organizations spending a fortune on security technology and deploying sophisticated email filtering, advanced firewalls, network access controls to mitigate the growing cyber threat. Unfortunately, none of this technology can entirely solve the human factor and the human element of it. And so threat actors are constantly building plans and attack strategies against that human element. So social engineering, definitely one of them. It includes cases where employees have inadvertently provided attackers with information that not only is sensitive business information or providing passwords, but also provides them with information on potential system vulnerabilities that can help launch successful attacks against them. Weak passwords, again, spoken about that. Attackers can use password cracking tools to guess or steal passwords and then use them to gain access as well. So, these are all vulnerabilities that the threat actors are using, and these are human vulnerabilities there. So the majority of these attacks we are seeing in the media have that human element to them. Sharif, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, no, it was just to support that as well. I think we've also got to remember that within all of these organizations, the likes of LastPass, the big tech players that build the security stuff that we rely on, we've got to remember that there's also, we're going through a sort of large, almost .com 2.0 bubble burst at this moment in time. So we're losing a lot of tech talent within these organizations. Now, that's not to say that that's the sole reason of LastPass attacks or any of the others. But we've also got to remember that these systems are built by human beings. They're configured by human beings. Human beings will make mistakes. Even in the largest banks in the world, the largest tech firms in the world, people work hard. They're overworked. They will make mistakes. And I think naturally, it's not always just down to that sort of end user. And sometimes, certainly in the security awareness space, we generally tend to focus a lot on that end user. That end user makes the mistake. The end user don't click on the phishing link. End user is going to fall for social engineering attack. Or, if that email comes in from the CEO, just make sure you double check that it is, from the person that you think it's from. But, you know, engineers have a role to play in this, you know, and it's not just on the IT side. You've also got the OT side, the operational technology side, the industrial control system side, the people that build the stuff that control our grid systems, our communication lines. And you know, so this is where security awareness generally filters, you know, not just beyond the small business space, but actually the very, very large business space as well. So, you know, I think it's important to understand that the human risk component within cyber pretty much touches every single area, every single technical level.
I might just jump in with my 2 cents as well there. I think it's really important to not just try focus on preventing incidents and attacks, but also preparing for them because of the human element. Every organization has, you know, hundreds, thousands, whatever it might be, employees that are in a different state of making mistakes, learning, tired, whatever it might be. And so actually acknowledging that an incident is likely to occur at some point and making sure that you're prepared, that all of your people know what to do if they see something that doesn't look right, they know how to report it, making sure that organizations are ready, even when they're a small business. If you're a small business, all it means is that your incident response plan is going to be a bit shorter because you're going to have less people to call, but that doesn't mean you don't need one.
Those are some great insights. Thank you. And then Dan, just your third and final question, which is, what are some emerging technologies or best practices that companies can implement to better mitigate human risk, and how can they evaluate their effectiveness?
Cool, thanks, S. Yeah, I mean, over the last few weeks, we've seen a hell of a lot in the news about AI and the use of AI and how that's being implemented more and more in the business place. Now, there is existing technology out there, and it's growing in its use, where, you know, AI and machine learning are being used in the security space to analyze user behavior and identify potential risks, such as abnormal login attempts or unusual data access patterns. So this technology is growing in the cybersecurity space, and it can definitely in the future, I think in the near future, help organizations detect and respond to potential insider threats more quickly. Along with that, and sort of similar technology, is behavioral analytics. A lot of the growing technology out there, a lot of the tech out there is using this type of behavioral analytics to identify patterns of behavior, detect anomalies, again, login times, login locations. All of this can really start helping us mitigate against that human risk. And so it's, like we've said, it's that balance between using the technology and, you know, we have to rely on technology as much as you know, we want to talk about security awareness training and focusing on the humans and building culture. That is great, and that's certainly an element, but we have to use technology, and the technology is out there, and it's growing, and it's going to become a lot more widespread. Continuous monitoring, a lot of companies are doing that, monitoring user activity, network traffic in real time, detecting potential threats. So much of that endpoint monitoring now is out there as well. And then zero trust architecture. This is a sort of growing concept. A lot of large enterprise organizations taking their security quite seriously are adopting this. And I think sort of the SMEs out there really need to start adopting this as well. And this is a security model that assumes that all users, all devices, all applications are untrusted, and they require authorization for access to those resources. And so this is something that even the smallest organizations need to start considering there. Susie, something from you?
I was just going to add, for small businesses, all of that sounds like so much technology and so much investment that's required, but that's not necessarily the case. There are solutions out there in behavioral analytics that are very affordable, that can help you get across things. So I just wanted to, for those small businesses here on the call, don't get too intimidated by it. There are solutions that are designed and are priced for you to be able to afford them and use them.
For sure. And then finally, you know, the softer approach, you know, moving away from the tech space there is cybersecurity awareness training. You know, regular training for employees can help them understand the risks and understand the consequences of cyber attacks, and really just how they fit into the bigger picture of managing cyber risk in an organization. And that, you know, despite the technology that they have to use and they have to adopt, it's just, you know, it's not just an IT problem. They do play a role. They do help. They are part of the solution when it comes to mitigating cyber risk. So training is really important there. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. We're on to our second topic, which is security awareness in 2023. And this is for you, Susie. So question number one, with increasing use of mobile devices in the workplace, how can individuals and organizations ensure that these devices are secure and not putting sensitive data at risk?
I think at the end of the day, the first thing is just to acknowledge the reality that everybody is using mobile devices. For so long, organizations were allowing people to use their own mobile phones for work, allowing them to download apps, etc., and not actually acknowledging the fact that those devices are not set up in the way that, you know, a large corporation would expect them to be if they were handed out by the company. So just acknowledging the fact that bring your own device and that flexibility comes with elevated risk. And once you have acknowledged that, the next is actually to sit down and agree what minimum controls you expect people to have in place. If they're going to connect to your systems from their personal device or their mobile device, then you should be able to tell them which controls you expect them to have in place. You need to be able to articulate to them which apps you expect them to have in place, whether or not you're going to have centralized monitoring of those devices, whatever it might be, particularly those organizations that use things like tablets. You know, I'm thinking of industries like mortgage broking and that sort of thing in Australia. Quite often, all of those mortgages are actually executed on tablets. But what is the security on that tablet? And have you actually articulated what security controls you expect to have in place? So it's a really important step, is to actually sit down and consciously decide what do you feel is at least minimum standards for your devices. And next, you need to socialize that with the team, and in particular, socialize it with your leaders so that they know exactly what the expectations are, and that when they're managing their staff and their team, that they're actually checking and making sure that those controls are in place. It's one thing to write it down, and it's one thing to tell people that'll do it, but if you never actually check, and if your managers don't know that that's part of their job to check, then how do you know any of it is in place? So making sure that you're being very intentional about managing bring your own devices, whether it be or mobile devices generally, whether they be company owned or bring your own, is a really important step, and making sure that everybody understands the expectations when working for your organization.
Dan, I see you raise your hand. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, just adding on there, Susie, as well. Understanding the expectations, really, really important. So everyone understands why these are being put in place, because there's always pushback. Nobody likes rules. Nobody likes policies. There's always going to be pushback on it. And 90% of the time, that pushback is normally coming from senior leaders. They're the first ones to bitch and moan about it, because it's additional steps. It's not easy for them. But we need to also recognize in organizations that the level of tech sophistication and maturity in tech users is very different from, you know, the youngsters we've got in organizations to the old and bold senior leaders. We can't assume that everyone knows how to do all of that. And if we're putting in controls, we really do need to give step-by-step guides on how to implement it, how to make it as easy as possible, because the minute something is difficult, people will avoid it and try and find ways around it. So the easier that we as training teams or security teams or IT teams can make that in explaining how to actually implement and go about using your mobile devices or laptops safer, it's going to be implemented a lot more successfully.
Great, thank you. Susie, do you feel the rise of AI such as ChatGPT poses a threat to the security posture of organizations, or can this be used in a positive manner to enhance overall cybersecurity?
Well, all technology, especially emerging technology, even when designed for good, presents a risk, and presents a risk to organizations, whether or not they're using the technology, if it happens to reach them as humans, as we're talking today. So the rise of ChatGPT does certainly pose a threat in terms of giving, I guess, less assurance that the person you believe you're integrating with or communicating with is actually the person, or whether or not they're a bot. But I think that our overall, as society, we've been sort of losing a lot of our assurance that we've been dealing with the people that we think we are over the last few years anyway. So I think that that's actually less of a concern. But the fact that there is risk in technology doesn't mean we shouldn't use it. I mean, we're all joined right across the globe today because of technology has enabled us to do that. We at Cynch, we're using ChatGPT quite extensively throughout our platform to help speed up a lot of our processes that AI can help to speed up. So we have a lot of content within our platform that translates things from technical information into plain language. We've figured out how to use ChatGPT to get our first initial draft of that translation in seconds. So there's certainly some fabulous things that come from some of the emerging tech out there, but there's also some scary things. So naturally, when we're talking about the human element, the fact that you can now basically create on a screen an image that looks like somebody else, the fact that you can copy their voice using some of this emerging technology, all of that poses threats. And so we all need to be mindful that we're living in a world now where you can't just take it for granted that the person that you think you're talking to is the person you're talking to, and you need to make sure and stay vigilant at all times.
Absolutely. Sharif?
I think everything Susie said there was absolutely bang on. And I think if you look back in time on AI used in a cybersecurity context before ChatGPT came along, one of the challenges that I think AI deployed across networks, if you will, on admittedly mostly larger organizations, is it would be assuming the behavior on that organization is actually good, correct, and working correctly. So it would actually just copy and pick up those bad behaviors and then just spit that back to you and say you're doing really, really well. But actually, how does it know what right looks like? I think that the rise of tools like ChatGPT, as exactly as Susie said, it has now allowed security researchers, security developers, software developers to really speed up their own processes. And yes, that does have a challenge on the other side, because it's also going to be able to do the same for the adversaries who are conducting these threats on our networks, or towards our networks. But the reality is it's here to stay. The better acquainted everybody can get with using these tools now, the more secure we're going to get naturally. We are going to be dealing with, larger scale threats that can, if you will, automate a heck of a lot more than they used to. But the defenders have a say in this. And I think that's one of the other challenges as well, is that, sometimes we focus so much on the threat that we sometimes forget that actually we've got some really good people who know how to use these tools to their advantage to secure their posture. Again, that comes down to security awareness. It comes down to the human element. We have to trust our humans to make the right decisions, and tools like this will help people be better at their job.
Just jumping on there at the end of that, Sharif, and actually just a question back to yourself and Susie, and just to hear your thoughts. Is there a risk that as businesses now start jumping on using these chatbots and these AI bots, is there a risk that companies are going to be inadvertently sharing very sensitive information back into these bots and back into this technology to help them build company documents, company strategies, company secrets, and we're just pouring these into these bots that, if those companies are hacked, if they are breached, we're giving away all the crown jewels? Or, counter to that, is it no different to creating our Google Docs and our Microsoft Docs, in the web? Is there a risk that we are just giving all our information away to these new AI bots, and not really thinking about the risk of how sensitive that information is that we're pouring into them?
I'm happy to go first there, because there's a different kind of adversary for a different kind of risk asset there. So I think, without wanting to sort of throw this and make a wildly sweeping statement, I think it's not so much of a worry as people will put out there. I think criminals will go after the data that they want to go after in order to put pressure on organizations to make them money. I'll give you an example, the rise of ransomware. So what you saw with big game ransomware, so if you look at the history of ransomware attacks, 6-7 years ago, it was spray and pray malware attacks, spray your network as far and as wide as you can, and then just pick up some of those stragglers who basically haven't got some of the most basic controls, slap them with 3, 4, 5, $600 fines, ransom demands, away you go, collect your ransoms, and away you go. That evolved then into big game ransomware hunting. And that big game ransomware hunting was to do basically the same thing, but far more targeted. And then because it took them, the cost of attack increased for the attackers, therefore their demands on the ransom end, it increased with it. Then evolve even more recently, I saw GoldPhish posted something which was quite interesting around patient records. So a cancer patient records whose there was pictures of this cancer patient, taken by the doctor for purposes of helping them get better. Now, hospital gets hit with a ransom because they've got this data now, and now they're holding them to ransom on a different kind of, with a different kind of data. And I think the point is there's going to be those that are exactly as you say, Dan. You're building documents, you're storing them in Google, you're storing them within cloud services anyway. It's down to the protection of those cloud services. Do I think we're at a point where, these large language models like ChatGPT are going to be a risk for us building highly sensitive stuff? Probably not. Because most organizations aren't building missiles, they aren't building F-35 planes, and they're still doing it the old school way, within their own network. So I think that's the long-winded answer of saying I don't think it's as topical of a high risk space when there are so many other data assets in which criminals can hold you to ransom on, steal, use against you. I don't think we're there yet with this.
I would certainly agree with that. But to add to that, who I do think that the rise of ChatGPT and these sort of very usable AI tools really does pose a threat to, but not a cybersecurity threat. But I've got to say, I would be pretty nervous if I was a digital marketing business right now. Digital marketing, content creation, translation services, any business that is based on language right now, and their competitive edge is based on language, they should be very nervous about these tools and the use of these tools. So just from a viability, I think we signed up for ChatGPT and it charged us 84 cents last week. I don't think there's a digital marketing agency on the planet that would have charged me 84 cents last week. So it's a very different risk that I think that's causing.
Yeah, 100% for sure.
So I've got to wade in on something as well there, and that raises an entirely different rabbit hole conversation, which we will not go down to today. But that is, social. What is the future of the workspace look like? Because the future of the workspace again will have an impact on cyber risk. It's as simple as that. The more people that are out of work potentially, we will need to find ways of income streams, and more and more people are tech literate now as well. So again, this could we see an increase in crime due to unemployability over the history of time? But again, completely different topic, but it's just it's something to think about in the future as well.
Absolutely. Susie, your final question is building on what you said in question number 2, and it's what are your predictions as to how the security awareness landscape may evolve over the coming months, and how can organizations prepare for this ever-changing environment?
I think the two biggest impacts, certainly on Australian businesses, but right across Southeast Asia in particular, and I'd call on the other panelists to comment in their regions. There's two big things that are driving change. So first of all, customer expectations have gone through the roof, particularly here in Australia. So on the back of the large Optus and Medibank breaches that we saw here in Australia last year, overnight, customer expectations for our customers, our small business customers, completely transformed. So again, I spoke about, we have a number of mortgage brokers that use our platform. They were reaching out to us 3 days after the Optus incident and saying, can you help us draft a response to our clients that are currently asking us how do I know that you're going to protect my data and you're not going to become the next Optus? That changed overnight. Here in Australia, we're known as being pretty laid back, pretty casual most of the time, and certainly it's been disappointing as a security professional over the last few years to see that customer expectation hadn't shone through, and then one major breach and everything changed overnight. So first of all, as an organization, be prepared to answer that question. Actually know how to respond to a customer that's saying, what are you doing to protect my data? How do I know you're not going to lose it like Medibank and Optus and all of the others? So preparing a response. But secondly, if you haven't actually taken the steps you need that to be able to answer those questions, then now's the time. You simply can't wait any longer. There's been a lot of organisations that have been caught out over the last 6 months because their customer expectations flipped overnight, and all of a sudden they found a significant portion of their revenue at risk because they hadn't taken action earlier. So I think that's a really important thing to recognise, is that customers will be driving better behaviour with their higher expectations over the course of the next year. Secondly, and I think this is applicable right across the globe. Actually, I might go through to the other panelists to see if that's similar in your regions before I go to my next comment.
Yeah, we've definitely seen similar as well, Susie. I mean, even in the South African landscape, commercial tenders now are asking those hard questions about security and needing to show evidence. You know, a lot of our customers are bidding on some big tenders, and you know, unless you can show evidence of good cybersecurity practices, including security awareness training, you're not getting into those tenders, and so it's impacting commercial viability for organisations, definitely. In the UK as well, we've got customers there that there's government minimum requirements. Their cyber essentials system that they've got there. If you're wanting to do any type of commercial work with public companies there, you're needing to show cyber essentials as a very bare minimum, security awareness being one of those. So it's definitely impacting how organizations are working, and that is thankfully finally driving the security maturity of a lot of small companies as well who want to be operating in that space.
I think security awareness has now become the working at height training for the construction industry. It's the use of ladders on building sites for construction industry. It's now come to the point, the forefront of, if you're going to at least have any chance of starting to implement a security culture across entire industries of any kind whatsoever, you have to start with people being aware of what the problem actually is that you're trying to solve. And I think that's where a lot of this has been driven, is a bit like the health and safety incidents. The cyber insurance, which is probably a good segue into my areas now, the cyber insurance industry has identified this and driven for a lot of these behaviors. And it's not just security awareness, it's the use of MFA, it's the use of 3-2-1 backup plans, for example, for small organizations. That all has to come from a sense of awareness of the reasons as to why you're doing it and what we're asking you to do, or the other way around. But yeah.
I think just building off that as well, and it certainly builds on both comments that Dan and Sharif made, more regulation right across the globe. So here in Australia, there's been significant noise by our governments, whether it be at a federal or a state level, about changes that they are looking to make. Certainly across the states, there has been just about from a security regulation perspective, you can't really call it the United States of America. It's more like the 50 states of different regulations. And certainly right across Europe, there's increased expectations and regulations has been pretty regular right across the region there for the last decade or so. What's interesting is to see now many Southeast Asian and Asia Pac countries that had previously had no concept of privacy or security regulations now releasing them. So last year, Thailand released its first, actually began enforcing its first privacy laws. That was the first time that Thai nationals actually had a right to privacy. And you give people rights, they start enforcing them. So I think staying on top of regulations, particularly if you're a business that doesn't just operate in the region that you are in, is going to become more cumbersome. But it's also going to become a very interesting space because, with global businesses and cutting across different tides, unfortunately, regulation is not going to get any easier. It's only going to get worse. So making sure that you're on top of how it is now so that then you can monitor for changes will be really important for organisations to do.
Great. Thanks, Susie. So moving on to our final topic, which is the new cyber landscape. This is for you, Sharif. So question number one, how is the cyber landscape evolving and how can organizations work with their cyber insurance providers to ensure that they remain insurable?
So I think a couple of things I mentioned before. Just I think that the rise of ChatGPT and AI is obviously going to be a challenge in the future, and that is increasing that sort of technology growth factor, if you will, that's going to shape the cyber risk landscape. But we're also back in this cyclical approach of cyber now. Ransomware. So back in 2015, it was the data breach, the big data breaches, the large organizations being hit. Then it was the ransomware attacks. Then it was the war footing, with the Ukraine-Russia challenge. I think war fatigue will start to settle in, and I think we'll probably start to see some of those big game ransomware hunting groups back out. I think we're already starting to see it. I think the interesting thing, like I said, putting the power back into the defenders is I think, the insurance providers have actually led with a lot of these controls, more controls, more cover, because what you've seen is that you saw a huge rise in premiums for several factors. They call it a hard market. So the market was hardening for several factors. You had the COVID pandemic, you had unsustainable ransomware attacks, if you will, and the insurance industry had to make a change there. So it's put a heck of a lot of those demands, as Susie was saying, around the regulation side as well. So you've got this sort of perfect storm of regulatory compliance from outside agencies. You've got the cyber insurance driving this as well. So, I mean, in short, it comes down to more controls, more cover effectively. And the insurers are getting better now at identifying organizations from not only an outside-in scan, but also a lot of them now saying, well, we'll sit on your network. And we'll sit on your network and we'll monitor you and we're going to ping you. As soon as something, you've got a misconfiguration somewhere, or you're not implementing, or you haven't implemented your security awareness and your phishing simulations that you promised us that you're going to be doing every month or every couple of months, and they'll ping you and they'll let you know. And if they let you know, they'll improve your cover based on some of that. So we're starting to see some of that with some of the rising insurtechs. But yeah, over to Susie.
I just wanted to add, for small organisations that may not really have the ability to, negotiate what they're covered for, they really just have they have a choice of policies that are available with whatever wording that they're based on. That doesn't mean that you don't have the choice and a real opportunity to go out and use the fact that cyber insurance exists as a way to guide you on what you should be implementing. All of these insurance providers, they start by issuing a proposal form with us a string of questions about your security. Many small organisations would not be insurable today because they wouldn't be able to say yes to enough of those questions about do you have these controls in place? So use those proposal forms as a guide on which controls you should be prioritising in your organisation first. Work on getting yourself insurable in the first instance, even if you don't actually purchase insurance. Cyber insurance is incredibly important for businesses because they provide you with access to experts and people that can help you respond to the incident quickly. But not everybody can afford it. Not everybody will have the risk appetite that leads to it, but that doesn't mean you can't use the fact that this industry has been providing cover for 30 years as a source of real knowledge that you can actually use to guide your operations.
I think Susie and Sharif hit the nail on the head. And Sharif, ties into your first question, which is, what are the latest trends and developments in the cyber insurance markets, and how are these shaping the landscape in 2023?
So I think the big one for the cyber insurance industry, which doesn't necessarily affect small businesses so much, but it has, it is certainly reared its head. Well, one of them does. But number one is war cover. So, you know, the insurance industry has been sort of grappling as to define what cyber warfare actually looks like. And it's now got its case study effectively, you know, because when you start to look at what happened with the invasion of Ukraine is, you know, we were all expecting this huge sort of industrial control systems level major systemic attack caused by warlike activity on that invasion. That didn't happen. It wasn't to say that those networks weren't being pressed and weren't being pressured, but again, it comes back to the defenders. The defenders have a vote in some of this stuff. So what we have seen really is cyber trench warfare rather than cyber systemic warfare. And I think, you know, there's been a heck of a learning activity there by the entire market. But that, unfortunately, has driven, and rightly so to a degree in some respect, some of these major large organizations away from the insurance market, because actually some of these major S&P 100 companies, well, their only risk will be from nation state actors. And you know, so just to cover on the warlike side, is that actually the insurance industry has now expanded, certainly out of Lloyd's, in terms of its view on that of actually not covering nation state backed attacks. And that was a sort of hangover, if you will, from the NotPetya attacks in 2017. So that's number one. The number two, which will affect small organizations as well, and will be a factor in why premiums increased so much, and that's systemic risk. So if you think of, you know, a piece of upstream software that is used by an industry vertical, if that goes pop and affects 25,000 organizations all at once, the industry hasn't factored that in. It hasn't modeled for that historically. So it's now starting to work all of that stuff out, and it's getting there, you know, but these are the latest trends, if you will, for the cyber insurance industry that have an impact on individual organizations. So that's why they have to manage their exposure to ensure that, well, if one specific piece of software goes pop, it doesn't affect 20,000 organizations all at once. So actually it's down to the organizations to ensure that they've got the specific controls needed. And it's not just the individual controls, but it's making sure that you can recover all of your systems and backup within a period of sort of several days or whatever. So in order to do that, you can't have all of your systems and all of your, you know, all of your data and all of your systems tied to one specific cloud provider, for example, or one specific MSP. So it's things like that, those sort of trends which have really helped to shape the landscape of where we are. And it wasn't just purely in 2023, you know, or as we got there. That's been a, you know, an ongoing activity, if you will, that's got us to where we are over the last several years.
I think a positive trend or a positive development as well, Sharif, is, you know, with all the push for improving security maturity across the SME sector, you know, everything that Susie mentioned there, as SMEs are becoming more mature and they're implementing better security and they're taking it more seriously, so are they're starting to look to manage their risk a lot better, and so they're looking for insurance. You know, 10 years ago, your SME market had no interest in cyber insurance. It just wasn't the target there. And so what we see now is in the insurance space is it becomes really competitive space. They're offering great product. They're offering great services. The prices are coming down for that SME market because it's becoming so competitive, because the SMEs want cyber insurance. And so on Susie's point there, it can be expensive, you know, depending on your level of cyber hygiene, but small businesses can go shopping now for it. There are options in the market. You can really shop around and find really good insurance products that provide a lot of services to you and will help you get a lot more mature and become insurable as well. So I think that's a positive development in the insurance space now as well.
There was a question that just flew in there that I think I'll probably just tackle, if that's all right. Just it was, you know, should we store our data on more than one cloud? And the insurance industry has sort of led with this in terms of what it wants to ensure it manages its risk. And for most organizations, I'm assuming we're all small organizations on this webinar today, if you think about it in its most basic format, you know, the insurance industry is looking to come up with a set of rules, if you will, that it can at least design out pretty much all bad risk, or as much bad risk as it possibly can. So if you think of a small organization, think of a 3-2-1 backup type plan. You know, it doesn't work for all organizations, but for smaller organizations, if you have 3 different backups on 2 different mediums, that could be one on-prem, it could be one, if you're really small, it could be on an external hard drive that you've got locked in your safe that you do a run on every Friday, you know, and have one of those off-site or offline. So yes, one within a cloud service, you know, provider, but that's just for your systems and your data. I mean, it's not always feasible. I mean, we're quite fortunate this day and age. I think Susie was talking about it in, you know, during the mobile devices and having more access to mobile devices. We're having more and more access to multiple different cloud systems anyway. You know, every single app that you'll have on your phone, you know, will lead you down a different cloud pathway. So in some respects, you're actually spreading your risk just by doing that in that sense anyway. But yeah, I hope that answers that question.
I might just add to that, Sharif, that the other thing that's important with that, if you are managing multiple clouds, is making sure that you're aware of what's in each location.
Yeah.
So making sure that you're tracking your data is just as important as making sure you're securing any cloud environment that you're using. Because if you do have an issue, the first thing you're going to want to know is what was taken, what have I lost? And if you don't know what's there, you're not going to know.
Great, thank you. Sharif, your final question before we go to a quick QA session is, going forward, how can organizations minimize their risk, and what are some vital first steps to ensure that they're covered by insurers' changing policies?
So I think, you know, to continue on the theme of doing the basics and doing the basics well, I think is going to be critically important to continue to work together in unison with insurers. You know, insurers' policies, like I say, they're not changing too much for small organizations. Small organizations can get the right cover at the right price, because that price will start to come down. Budgets are shrinking. You know, that is going to be common across the board. So that's going to have an impact. You know, so it's about making sure that you utilize the security controls of your managed service provider, and also utilize the blended products that insurers will provide as well. Because as weirdly enough, as premiums will come down, and they will come down, they'll have to come down, because, you know, we've hit that point of sort of unsustainability, if you will, in terms of budgets for insurance. Look for your blended products. Speak to insurers that will provide you with your security awareness training, that will provide you with your other tools that will help you, you know, in your quest for remaining insurable, but also getting better value for money from your insurer. In your healthcare insurance world, for example, you know, some of the healthcare insurers will provide you with a gym membership, or a reduced gym membership, or your nice, you know, Garmin watch or whatever, or Apple Watch, you know, at a better price. Insurers are working, cyber insurers are working exactly the same. They're trying to provide more value for you. So look at the more bolted services that these companies will provide, and that can help.
Great, thank you, Sharif. So yeah, thank you to all our hosts for your valuable insight. This is officially the end of the preset questions. We're opening the floor to the webinar guests, and I see there were a couple of questions, so let's quickly run through them. So question number 1 was, how can companies prepare for and respond to human-related security incidents like phishing attacks, insider threats, and social engineering scams?
You want to start off with that, Dan, and I'll jump in after?
Yeah, sure. I think first and foremost is you know, having procedures in place, being able to plan for it, being able to look at the threats, and just have procedures. I mean, it's a good baseline to start from. It lets your organization sort of understand what the plans are, start communicating those procedures and those policies out, and then, you know, training around those is really important. If employees don't understand the controls you're trying to put in place, you know, you've got no chance of them implementing it. You've got zero chance of them following it. And remember, there's always going to be pushback in an organization. When you bring in different password policies, or you bring in different work from home policies, or you bring in different mobile device policies, it makes perfect sense to the IT team. It makes perfect sense to the security team. You guys, the technical amongst you know exactly what this means and why it's important. If you don't explain that importance to the organization through correct communication, everyone's just going to push back against it. They're going to find ways around it. They're going to do their utmost to avoid, the controls, because it's a pain, and nobody likes it. Everyone wants to avoid pain. And so I think, number one is getting your procedures in place, figuring out what you want to do. Number two is communicating that correctly, and then training your employees, around those, so that they can do it easily and they understand the value in it. Susie?
Yeah, just to build on that, and really about that question of how to prepare for these sorts of incidents. Preparation, it's not just about writing a plan and procedures, which is absolutely the first step, and followed by training, but it's also about testing those procedures, testing and actually trialing, running a desktop exercise as if it was a mock cyber attack, a mock data breach, a mock ransomware event. Actually testing your team on a pretty regular basis, so that you can actually be ensured that, first of all, the plan's actually going to work and work the way that you think it's going to. But second of all, that everybody understands what their role is and what they need to do. That's one of the critical steps that quite often is missed when it comes to preparing for incidents and building plans, is actually testing that. There are both products out there that you can use to help your business to test on a pretty regular basis your cyber incident plans, but there's also services and companies out there that can actually come in, run a mock exercise, and really stretch that plan so that you can see where the gaps are and fill them.
Just to build on that question, there was another question around, are there any other ways to educate employees and users of a company on how to stay safe and be aware of these attacks, other than sending out training and phishing campaigns?
Yeah, look, I mean, if you think about how can you educate your staff on anything, they're the methods that you can use to educate your staff on cyber. Thinking about what are the channels that you usually use to communicate, making sure that cyber is a topic of conversation within each and every one of those channels. If you see a webinar like this that you think this is really interesting for me, actually encouraging your team to come along and attend as well. Signing up for newsletters and podcasts, searching out what are the things that are actually going to engage your team, depending on who makes up your team. I know in my team, one of the ways that we keep them up to date with all of the latest threats and trends, and keeping in mind most of my team are tech, so they're pretty nerdy, is giving recommendations around podcasts. And I was listening to this episode the other day, and wasn't this interesting, etc. So being able to communicate in the language that your team actually uses is really, really important.
Yeah, and just to add on there, that the language bit is really important, and getting that right, and making sure that the messaging that you're putting across, or the articles that you're sharing, or the information you're sharing is relevant and as personal as possible. If it's applicable to people, they'll engage with it. If it's completely not applicable and something to do with some random industry standard that has no impact on anyone, they're just going to breeze over that, and they're not going to read it, and they're going to start turning off to it. Whereas if organizations can have these conversations and start sharing information that an individual can go, wow, that actually applies to me or my loved ones or my family, or that's going to help me stay safe and keep my online life a lot safer, then people will engage with that. And so the language needs to be right. And
One of
the applicability of it is really, really important.
I just wanted to agree with you there, Dan, but also when you are sharing articles or podcasts or whatever, actually telling them why you're sharing it. It's don't just send it in an FYI email, because FYI emails rarely get read or engaged. Actually say, hey, I just read this article. I really liked the bit about this. Take read. Just that extra 20 seconds that it takes to type out a sentence can make sure that it actually gets through to the team that you want it to get to.
Great, thank you. And I think we have time for one last question. And then this is specific to you. The question is, can you elaborate further on how businesses can evaluate their effectiveness? This is in relation to mitigating human risk.
Sure. So there's a number of technologies and best practices that businesses can do of all sizes to actually try and evaluate how effective the controls that you put in place. Conducting regular risk assessments. Other organizations can do them themselves, or if they've got a trusted partner, a trusted managed security service provider, they can come in, run risk assessments on a regular basis, help them identify potential vulnerabilities and areas of improvement. So it's constantly a work in progress with them that they can do that. There's technology to help organizations monitor and analyze user behavior, and that can be used to track the effectiveness of their mitigation efforts. So if they are implementing controls, they can then analyze that and monitor the behavior afterwards. Conducting regular security audits or penetration testing to actually test the security that's in place and the firewalls and the protection that's in place, that you can identify potential weaknesses. And that can include phishing simulation. So a phishing simulation is a perfect human penetration testing assessment. You can actually assess how vulnerable your organization is to social engineering, and you can run communication campaigns, you can run training courses, you can raise awareness in your organization, and then regularly run phishing simulations and see how that's impacting your organization. See if more people are reporting it, see if more people are talking about it, and try and make it a regular thing. And then finally, solicitate getting feedback from your employees and other stakeholders. Have the conversations with them. Really open it up to the organization and have open discussions, not only with people on your team, but the leadership, your board members, your larger organization. The more get a feel for how they're perceiving security, what they think of the security controls in place, what their perception is of the security team, because a lot of the time it's an us versus them thing. And having those conversations and being open and conversational about security in an organization, that's all about culture. That's where we talk about culture and how everyone perceives it, whether it's a really negative thing or it's something that they think is really important and helps the organization. So, finally getting feedback from the organization is really important as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you everyone for attending our webinar, and to our hosts for your time. Have a lovely day and evening, and stay safe. Goodbye.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, Susie. Cheers, Sharif.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.